Welcome to the Furrows Podcast, a podcast where we have conversations with classical educators who have been transformed by classical education and are in the process of continuing that great work in transforming the souls of others. I'm Ryan Klopak, the Director of Search over at Arcadia Education, and I'm joined here by Alex Julian, the Director of the Baccalaureate Program over at CLT. And Alex, we've got a really exciting guest on today. Would you tell us a little bit about who is joining us?
Yeah. So this is Dr. Anthony Sciubba. He runs one of the largest K-5 classical schools in the Southwest, if not the largest, based out of the Phoenix Valley. And we're really excited to have him on today. I don't want to give more of a background than that because then the episode would be over. So we're gonna go into it right now. But yeah, Anthony, I'd just love to start with who was little Anthony Sciubba, growing up pre-classical, because you're one of the most classically versed people I know. and I'm guessing there's a before and after.
Well, thank you. So yeah, I was born and raised here in Arizona. Got to grow up in Gilbert, actually, when it was farmland then. It was not yet Scottsdale 2.0.
It smelled a lot different.
Yes, it absolutely did. And got to grow up on 5 acres across the street from my grandparents in the house that my parents still own. So that was awesome. And did public education growing up my entire life. Very much enjoyed it and benefited well from that. And then just grew up in a really good supportive faith community, one that really emphasized sort of the fundamentals of the New Testament and the Scriptures. And I think that was sort of my first encounter with what you could call something classical. The schools that I grew up in didn't really emphasize particular works of literature or the classics, so to speak, as much. It was really through that experience, just growing up in Christianity, that I first, encountered the Scriptures. So definitely enjoyed always getting to the bottom of those, and grew up in a denomination that really emphasized going back to the origins of things. And so that element of classical education has just always resonated deeply with me and been baked into my DNA. But it didn't always translate to actual literature. In 7th grade, I had the dubious distinction of being in one of the cohorts that got to go on a more accelerated pace. I thought that was exciting at first, right, as a middle school student. And then we read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And I was bored out of my mind.
In 7th grade?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
wow.
Yeah.
It was a mismatch.
Yeah,
sure.
Hated it. And I remember saying at one point in one of the discussions to my teacher, I'm under the impression that a work has to be boring in order to be classical. Is that true? And I meant every word of it. And it kind of reminded me, well, it didn't remind me then, but it reminds me now of something that Winston Churchill writes in. There's a short essay that he writes on painting, and in that essay, he talks about classical education and classical literature. And one of the things he said is, be wary of reading something classical too early. And so that's been a good sort of sobering reminder for me now, is you can kind of kill that enthusiasm if you go too early. So definitely was not always drawn to classical literature, given that story with Dickens, but kind of began to turn around and turn towards that eventually as time went on.
Interesting.
Were you a shallow kid growing up, or were you trying to be deep? I mean, tell me about that. Like, I know that there are a lot of people who get into classical education and then looking back, they think, oh, I feel like I was actually kind of skating on the surface a lot. I don't know if that was true for you, if you were always intellectually curious, if you had a hunger, or if that was just something that developed later on.
I think I always had a hunger for it, but I didn't know exactly what I was hungering after, right? I remember at times picking out a book because it looked like it was something that an older person would read, read some Sherlock Holmes because that was just fun, or some of the other adventure books for that same reason. But kind of had always had that desire for a deeper knowledge, I think, growing up. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a shallowness in the midst of it. So especially like, in grad school, when one tries to really be academic and posture a little bit and write the paper in a way that sounds really, really polished when you can really just kind of say the thing and move on. Definitely played that card way more often than I should have, and had good professors who sort of taught me how not to do that, which was a blessing. But yeah, I'd say that there was always an interest in going deeper into things and kind of understanding it more fully. So, yeah.
I think that's so interesting that in 7th grade you said it has to be boring to be classical, because I think people still think
yeah.
I actually think the majority of people coming from the outside, that's step one.
Yeah.
And maybe they think it's good, like taking their medicine is good. But I think some parents think that if they're going to send their kids to a classical education, there's almost a sigh of relief it's not them, because their kids are going to read all these good but boring books and labor through this thing. And I don't think it's associated with joy, wonder, curiosity. I mean, we talk about that, but from the outside, I don't think it is.
No, and it actually kind of, I don't know about you guys with teaching middle school and high school, but for me, that always brought a sigh of relief that, in middle school, I thought this was really boring. And then I fell in love with it, right? And so there's an element to which I think that as one teaching elementary school or middle school or high school, there could be a feeling of, oh, if only they just knew how great this was. But to pause and remember, well, I didn't know how great this was. And that's okay. And this all comes with time. But yeah, C.S. Lewis wrote something about that in, I think it was a book called Fern Seeds and Elephants, where he mentions there's this time where you start learning Greek just because, you're sort of told to, and maybe you notice that it's going to help you with getting a better score on the MCAT or something like that. But it's totally a means to an end. And then there comes a point when the person who's learning Greek actually ends up loving it and finding in it things that they didn't even know existed, right? And so I think that as we spend more time with most good things, we experience that, right? A lot of the best things are acquired tastes, and but yeah, there is that counterpoint where it can seem dry at first. One of my favorite movies is the movie Amazing Grace, about how William Wilberforce into the slave trade. And one of my favorite scenes is when one of the guys in the movie is walking around with his newborn, and he's reciting this beautiful poetry, and it's in a field, and it seems so idyllic and so classical. And he says, "That is a poem, and I have absolutely no idea what it means, but I was meant to memorize it as a child, and I don't see why you shouldn't have to suffer too."
Yeah, exactly. Well, were there, during that time, were there key teachers or key texts you read where it was the right time and the right level, and it was taught in the right way, and that stood out to you?
That's a great question. I had awesome teachers throughout middle school and high school, and really gravitated a lot towards the sciences at that time. Just a lot of the things in science really sort of spoke to the desire to go deeper, right? The fact that you could always learn more about photosynthesis, for example. So I definitely wanted to be a doctor at first, and be a science major and focus on math and those sorts of things. And I really enjoyed studying history, took some AP history courses. Those were wonderful. But there wasn't anything especially deep about the classics that I encountered or experienced in middle school or high school. Actually, it was really in college that happened. So I was informed that I'd be enrolled in a seminar called Great Books Colloquium at Pepperdine. And I didn't know what colloquium meant, but I thought that the books would probably be good. And so was enrolled in that and really, really loved it. And that was kind of the moment when I first truly encountered the classics and learned that there were people who had studied the deep questions that I was interested in and had come up with way more brilliant answers than I ever could have come up with using similar texts that I had used, right? Like using the New Testament or the Old Testament, things like this. And those findings really, really spoke to me. So, I guess one more tangible story of that would be just kind of in the midst of growing up in high school in Arizona, encountering just different religious traditions, right? Where very different understandings of like the divinity of Christ could exist. And going back and asking those questions at my church and having my church, which was very supportive and really great at helping me to go deeper into the New Testament, not really have answers as far as creeds or councils or any of those sorts of things, right? Nothing really connected with historic Christianity. And so it was only in college that I learned there's a guy named Augustine, and he had some of these questions, and he came up with some really phenomenal answers to some of these questions. And actually he had a lot of contemporaries who had a lot more to ask. So it was really through the great books Colloquium at Pepperdine, and then a couple of really phenomenal teachers at Pepperdine, Dr. Brian Givens, Dr. Stuart Davenport, who helped me really get into early Christian theology and classical history. And that ended up being a real delight. I became really obsessed with the question of how did the first Christians read the Bible? Like how did the Romans read the letter that Paul wrote to them? And felt very strongly that the way to answer that question was not just to study a bunch of works of theology, not just to study the New Testament, but ultimately to study all of the works that the Romans themselves read and experienced and wrote, the history in which they lived, the buildings that they inhabited. And so this created a desire to go on the deepest level I could in understanding both the classics and then also early Christian theology. Yeah.
What were those two things in competition in your mind at any point, as far as like, here's the culture of the Romans, the one that the poor Jews were trying to struggle against and ends up crucifying Jesus? Did you have that picture in your mind entering in, or at all? How did you see those two things working with each other, like the culture of the Romans and the faith?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's obviously that one of the verses in the New Testament where Paul sort of talks about the faith destroying philosophies of this world, right? For me, just always being a philosophical guy, I was like, nah, like, this stuff goes together great. And so what I ended up doing was trying to get my hands on Christians who disagreed about that in the early church. So one of my favorite things to do was to write a paper on Clement of Alexandria and Tertullian, who were contemporaries who didn't know each other, one in North Africa and one in Egypt, who could not have been more different about anything. Tertullian having the famous line of what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem, sort of typifying that divide that you just mentioned. And then Clement of Alexandria, who continued to wear the philosopher's cloak and ran his own classical school in Alexandria and taught Christianity as the philosophy, right? And sort of the fullness of what Plato was going after. And so very much enjoyed sort of studying those guys in tandem. But for me, there was really a clear collegiality, I think, between the leaders of the Christian faith and the non-Christian leaders in ancient Rome. There was conflict, obviously, of course, but as far as like on the intellectual level, they were speaking the same language, like they were asking the same questions, they were using the same sources, and that was really, really interesting. So I guess one of the papers that most developed this obsession with the intersection and the integration between Christianity and the classics was a paper I wrote on the Gnostics and Irenaeus's Against Heresies that he wrote against the Gnostics. And that was really fun because the Gnostics were a second century group. They actually, some of them predated Christianity. But there was this idea of, well, where are the true heirs to Plato? And in fact, so they were sometimes using the work of John. And so Irenaeus did his best to argue against them. Fortunately for Irenaeus, Plotinus also did the same at the same time in Rome. And so the Gnostics ended up not being a sect that ended up continuing very long. But for me,
except again and again throughout history.
Well, yes, that's true. They kept coming back.
We keep trying bad ideas, don't we?
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, what is it about humans that they want to be Gnostic, despite how badly it's gone every time?
Yes, yeah, exactly. I think there's a self-importance to feeling like you have the secret.
Yeah.
I think that there's a self-importance to feeling like you figured out something no one else did.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I loved about the way that Irenaeus approached it is it was not an elitist argument. It was very much it was just very much a honest, like, no, you have the sources. Anyone can look at these. There's no hidden curriculum. It's all good, right? Go see and taste it for yourself. And so for me, it was studying the early Christian theologians, studying the patristic sources. It was as if I had an early Christian guide to the Greco-Roman world. When I was by myself, just reading, the works of the Gnostics or just reading Plotinus, it felt a lot more difficult and a lot more opaque. It was very different. But the early Christian authors were speaking in the same sort of milieu as I had grown up with the New Testament. And so it was a really great entry point to then being able to read, the works of the epic poets and the philosophers and all of that and all the classic sources apart from Christianity. So, but it just the realization that these were happening at the same time and we're in vigorous debate with one another and also just good discussion. For me, it was the reconciliation of two things that felt like they had to be separate growing up, right? So growing up in a public high school, church and state are completely separate, right? And with the churches I grew up in, there was almost an intellectual anti-intellectualism at times. Like the people who were leading and speaking were doing a phenomenal job and knew their scriptures deeply and were very smart people and very successful. But there could be an anti-intellectualism about it, of, you shouldn't study those aspects of science, or, one doesn't need to read very much outside the New Testament. And so when I saw people like Ambrose of Milan, engaging with Symmachus about whether or not there should be an altar of victory in the Roman Senate, and both of them pulling on diverse sets of texts, and not just it's not they always argued fairly, but generally speaking, not arguing past each other, but actually engaging with one another. It was, to me, extremely inspiring, right? And I think something that classical education really teaches us how to do is to be able to disagree passionately and charitably and with a conversation where we care deeply with one another. And that's very much needed, obviously, in the public discourse today, and something that AI can't fill the void for, right? Is that human interaction. And so, so I can see why there is a tension, I think, between classical and Christian in different circles. But for me, they come together beautifully. You can do classical without Christian, for sure. Plato's work predates the incarnate ministry of Jesus Christ. Yet at the same time, I also think that classical reaches its culmination in Christ, and that every word that was spoken by Plato or Homer or Virgil, where it was in agreement with Gregory of Nazianzus, inspired by the word and wisdom of God. So, yeah.
That's great. For our our listeners, we usually try to dig into some aspect that they might not be familiar with, some author that they might not be familiar with. So you just named so many different early Christian Roman sources. No, it's great. I hope, my hope is when people watch this that, or listen to it, that they are like, who's that guy? That's really interesting. And I think you sold them very well, but is there any one of those that you wouldn't mind going into a little more depth that inspired you or that you found really interesting, their arguments?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My favorite by far is Gregory of Nazianzus, 4th century theologian. Most Orthodox listeners would recognize him as sort of one of the 3 holy hierarchs. But before that, he was in a college town in Alexandria and also in Athens with his good friend Basil of Caesarea. And just very much a product of the Greco-Roman world. Grew up in a one-horse post town, Nazianzus, and was forced against his will by his father into the family business of being a bishop. There is the idea of course, that most people who go into leadership, especially theological leadership, will recognize that they're not worthy or try to kind of, say that they shouldn't be the right person for that, given their shortcomings. Gregory of Nazianzus literally ran away, like not metaphorically, literally. His second sermon, his second oration is an apology for his flight. And I think in both terms of what apology means, of like, hey, I'm sorry. And also apologia, let me tell you why. Right. So just such a really interesting story. His brother was the physician, the medical physician to the emperor. And the emperor was the Emperor Julian, who between 361 and 363 tried to change Christianity back to a pagan empire. And then he eventually became Bishop of Constantinople and chaired the Council of Constantinople, from whence the Nicene Creed came from 1,300 years ago this year, right?
I just want to
1,700.
I just want to put out there that there's no relation between me and no association there. I got to cover myself when people bring up that name.
Well done.
We'll see what Ancestry.com says about that.
But so one of the things about Gregory of Nazianzus that's so wonderful is that he was an orator, he was a pastor, he was a poet, a theologian, a monk who couldn't cut it as a monk.
What does that mean?
But he did not like Basil of Caesarea's very rigorous monastic order. For him, you got to get up, you got to have a nice cup of coffee, maybe a little like pastry and a croissant before you start your day. Was not going to work.
That was kind of the Desert Fathers period of time too.
Yes.
Like those were like the Guardians of the Galaxy monks, or the Avengers monks.
That's right.
People sitting on a pillar, out in the desert, like living on a 4x4 space.
Yes.
Yeah. Where people like Benedict are like, that's a little too extreme.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get together and do this thing together.
Yeah. Gregory was a bit ahead of the curve in realizing that was a bit too extreme as well. He felt similarly. So, so there's kind of something for everybody in Gregory of Nazianzus. One of my favorite things is actually his letters. Just a ton of letters from him survive. And they're written to people that you recognize, in the annals of history. And then, he had a debate with the Emperor Julian about Christianity and about the place of it in the Greco-Roman world. Was deeply involved in the Emperor Julian's attempts to actually outlaw Christian education. So classical Christian education was outlawed in the Roman Empire from 361 to 363.
Nice, dude.
There's a lot there. It's really deep and really fun. And there are 2 books actually that I'd recommend that are really helpful for being able to access Gregory's corpus of works. One is written by John McGunkin, and it's Gregory of Nazianzus, an intellectual biography. And so that book does an amazing job of just being able to humanize it, get at the context of it, and just fully understand the Greco-Roman context of what Gregory was experiencing so that you can access his works really easily. And then the other book is on the theology, and that's written by Christopher Beeley. And it's Gregory of Nazianzus on the Trinity and the knowledge of God. And so those are two books that are really helpful for reading and then just delving deeper. So
that's great.
Yeah.
I remember growing up having a distinct feeling that most of the world thought that you could either think seriously or you could be a Christian. In order to take option 2, you really need to check your brain at the door. And nobody's actually going to Christianity for answers for anything other than maybe consolation of what happens to me when I die, or is there anything more to this? Like almost being like a therapeutic salve.
Yeah.
But one of my greatest surprises studying classical education and the origins of Christianity was seeing that there was such a rich intellectual tradition at the very beginning of the Christian world. And not only that, that a lot of the great thinkers were asking the sorts of questions that Christianity seemed to be giving the best answers for, or maybe even coming to conclusions that really smell Christian. If only you had a little bit more context and revelation, you would have had exactly that. Were there any writers that surprised you with how Christian they sounded, even though they were pagan or neoclassical?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it was the works of Plato earlier on while at Pepperdine. I was just really amazed at how far he could go with his intellectual project, apart from like any revealed knowledge within the Bible. And in Aristotle as well, just being able to look at both a deductive and also an inductive approach to knowledge. Just the conclusions that they came to were amazing and so often consistent with Christianity. And if they weren't, made you think like really deeply and re-examine your thoughts. And so I can see why so many early Christian theologians sort of classified them as like, almost honorary Christians, so to speak, right?
Yeah. Like they're not, Socrates was not named a prophet in the Old Testament. But he sure seems pretty prophetic in terms of preparing the Greek world for Christ.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's actually, that's one of the things that brought me to focus on the 4th century was I just really wanted to see these two worlds come together. I wanted to integrate it more. And I believe that God gives you a heart and a head, right? And a body. And even if the Gnostics don't think he gave you a body, he gave you a body. He gave you a heart and a head and a body, and you're meant to honor and glorify and seek him with all of it. And any brand of Christianity that says that you need to be subpar intellectually in order to truly be faithful, it just doesn't seem consistent with the greatest commandment. It doesn't seem consistent with the incarnation and the story presented in the scriptures. And so, so I ended up looking at the 4th century because there was almost a little crisis of identity for the Christian church in the 4th century. Like in the 1st century, we kind of knew who we were, right? We're the Jesus followers and, trying our best to follow and understand like what it means to be Jewish and Christian in the midst of this and how those two worlds come together. And then 2nd and 3rd centuries, we became just a little bit too mainstream. Like now the Romans know we exist. There's some persecution going on. But hey, we are the countercultural and it is awesome being the counterculture. And isn't it great? And then up comes the 4th century and all of a sudden you are the establishment, right? And it's like moving from teaching to administration, like you're sort of used to like criticizing the administration.
And now you're
like,
the man.
And now you're the man. It's like, I can't stick it to the man anymore because I'm sticking to myself. Like, how do I actually build this thing right and proactively? I feel like the church was kind of experiencing that in the 4th century of we are no longer underground. but it was cool to be underground.
Mm-hmm.
We are now above ground. And what do we do now?
Right.
And what ended up happening, I mean, there's a lot of answers to that question, of course. Architecturally, it starts looking more like a Roman basilica, the churches do, and you add some side chapels to make it across, and, all these fun other things that happen. But intellectually, there was just such a deep discussion of, like, the greatest minds were now beginning to study theology on a deep level, right? Mm-hmm. And so as a result, there ends up just being so much more depth, so much more richness. And it became axiomatic during the 4th century that these things could and should go together. And that's ultimately why I'm convinced. It's not because of any specific argument. It's just experiencing it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the gifts of what a classical Christian education can bring in particular, is getting to sort of experience the culmination and the integration of that worldview. Ends up being quite inspiring.
So that's great. I want to get back to you in a second, like just you personally in your journey and where you were, where Anthony was rather than the studying that was happening. But the time period is so interesting, and you clearly spent a lot of time studying it. Mm-hmm. What was your sense of, and maybe I should back up. So there is this feeling that, okay, all wisdom really is contained in the New Testament. That's all you need to read, or Old and New Testament. That's the inspired work. In some churches, that's the feeling. Mm-hmm. And I know you felt that, like, you had all these questions. You were redirected back to the Bible, but you wanted more kind of context.
Yeah.
Did you find that some of these great Christians in the 4th century were classically educated and Christian at the same time? And then it wasn't just because they were pagan and then not pagan, but that they felt like this was the sort of right education that they needed to have. Okay. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's pretty important, and it's not brought up very often.
Yeah. Thanks for sort of just latching onto that, because I agree. There can be a feeling, and it did exist a little bit in the 4th century as well, that, hey, if you want to really be serious about your faith, then you got to avoid certain elements of study, right? And for the 4th century, there was just so many of the great theologians were classically trained in the deepest way. People like Ambrose of Milan or Augustine of Hippo, Gregory, Basil of Caesarea, John Chrysostom, etc. There's just such a depth there, and even the early Christian monks as well, where there can be an anti-intellectual strain just a little bit at times. Even it was really clear, had read that stuff. Yeah. And what's especially fun is when a bishop says, I just am weak in my knowledge of the things of the world. And they say it in the most beautiful Latin and Greek possible. And there's all the ablative absolutes going on and stringing together. It was just really obvious that in the 4th century and early Christianity at large, a strong education was seen as an onboarding to a strong faith, right? Mm-hmm. And so I do think that ends up being a really compelling reason to take our education seriously in the world in which we live. We want to love God with our mind as well. So yeah, I think that's definitely a piece of it.
That's great. Thank you.
Did the way that you read Scripture change after all of this encounter?
Definitely. And in a way that's not, I guess I'll just have to borrow from the words of N.T. Wright, where he said that when he says the creeds, his knowledge of what they mean has deepened and changed, right? And that's kind of similar to my experience with the Scriptures. So just getting to realize more that Paul was a part of a tradition, right? That he had read, his works, that he was in conversation with the apostles, and that when the early Christians are talking in Philippians 2, let's say, about Christ pouring out himself, I do think that Paul's quoting an early Christian creed there. I don't think he's just writing his own work necessarily in that spot. I think that does connect with what Athanasius is talking about with the Word becoming flesh, right? And with the incarnation and God being fully man, Jesus being fully man and fully God, right? So there's so many times when just things got clarified. Like Gregory of Nazianzus at one point takes a whole bunch of scriptures that refer to Christ's humanity and a whole bunch that refer to his divinity and just put them together in this beautiful poem that goes back and forth. So what could seem as a tension ends up like actually just being the invitation, right? And also just the experience of actually being a part of academia, going to Yale, going to Oxford, going to Emory, and just seeing that the best of scholarship is always happening through conversation, right? It's always happening through a sharing of ideas. It's always happening through a diversity of thought, through conversation with one another, and so often through relationships and friendships. I didn't really realize until grad school that most of the academics I was reading knew each other and were like friends and colleagues and sometimes hated each other. And so realizing like, oh, this is how this works. Like, this is how this happens. And as I'm experiencing that, saying, this is how this has always worked. This is how this has always happened. And that's really, really good. Well, then why not, right? Why not bring it all together? So.
I think that's so important because, growing up secular myself, the water I was swimming in was that every set of beliefs is basically just choosing a book to agree with, and all the books are kind of equal. Yeah. And so this when in the medieval times, Islam intentionally closed themselves off to like reading the Greeks and taking part in the tradition that was in Alexandria, and said, no, it's just going to be the Quran. I think there's this perception from the outside that every faith decided to do that, and that is religion itself. Religion is you read your book, you either choose to believe in it or you don't. And now we have a new wisdom because we're not being bound by the totality of a book, but we're interested in reality. And so I think what it inspired me so much about classical ed is no, all these people are in conversation with each other, all these texts are in conversation with each other, and that's actually the only way to have a worldview that meets with reality, because we have limited intellects ourselves.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that's why I'm passionate about classical education in particular is it's the belief that there is the great conversation, that there is like the large seminar that's happening through the ages. And it is not limiting that conversation to just the ideas and people walking around right now. Right. As C.S. Lewis mentions in a work on the reading of old books, the works of the future would be great. We just can't get to them yet, right? We read the old books because even though they're prone to error just as much as the new books are, they're not going to err in the same direction. And so we want to do a classical education, reading all the best works through history, for the same reason that we want to be interdisciplinary in our approach, right? I don't want an ophthalmologist who has only studied the eye, and that is it. And that is all they know about. And they have spent no time studying chemistry or physics or biology, right? I want them to have that deeper, more well-rounded knowledge because interdisciplinary is better and you learn more things. So also with classics, you get a more three-dimensional view, right, of the world. And so Yeah. Sorry if I'm quoting C.S. Lewis too much. I don't think that's
possible.
I'm a little obsessed. I got to be at the Kilns as a scholar in residence in the room where he died. Actually, I got to live there for a year while I was at Oxford. Yeah. So
we're gonna need to come back.
Yeah. It's just a little bit of a fanboy when it comes to C.S. Lewis, but he mentioned that when he was an atheist, he had to believe that all faiths were wrong. He had to believe that, that ultimately the materialistic world was what there was. And when he became a Christian, he could take a more liberal view, as he called it. He could look at all the different books. He could look at all the different faith traditions, all the different philosophies. And in the rare cases when one very blatantly disagreed with Christianity, he would have to figure out why the Christian one is right, since he's a Christian, and took that as a precept, or why his interpretation was incorrect. But he could go deeper into those things, right? And so, kind of what you're saying about, hey, there's this closed off sort of one bookedness, perception. I think that's really, really strong and compelling, because there's just so much openness, I think, in classical Christian education. It's so deeply ecumenical. As a result, there's so much interfaith dialogue as a result. It's actually really kind of funny, because classical Christian education, well, just historically speaking, I think it's the most historically significant movement in modern American Christianity. I think in 250 years, that's going to feel very clear. It's also, historically speaking, the most successful attempt at ecumenism.
Interesting.
Even though I don't think that was as conscious in the beginning with starting it. And it's ironic, because when the World Council of Churches attempted to bring different denominations of Christianity together in, I don't remember, like the 1950s or something, 60s maybe, one of the mantras was doctrine divides. So let's not talk about theology at all. We're going to get together and we'll try not to talk about that thing that unifies us, because the doctrine's going to somehow divide us, right? And classical Christianity is so interesting because despite the fact that it's not dogmatic, it's extremely theological. And there's deep, passionate disagreement that happens within it. And that disagreement is more exciting, more inviting, right? And it creates stronger bonds. And it's something that I think just reinforces precisely what you're saying about there being an openness to reading all the books, to engaging in all the conversations, and to listening well, hopefully, to everybody.
Yeah, that's good. I think the longer I've been in this space, the more I realize the thing you're usually criticizing is the kind of paradigm you're actually living in, or the currency you trade in. And so when you're criticizing, well, you each just have your book that you believe in, it's like, well, but you have just your narrow tradition and conception of science that you've latched onto, and so that's the book you've decided to believe in, and so the mantra lately in the last 5 or 6 years of, well, I trust science, and science has now become,
science is real.
It is. Science has become the religion. That there's a lack of ecumenism there.
Absolutely.
And so once you are open to saying, no, let me understand this person's perspective. Let me understand this person's perspective. I'm not threatened by that because it actually helps me understand what I think in the way that you're talking about C.S. Lewis. That's the thing that opens you up to getting nuance from other sides. So.
One of my favorite lines on that subject is, it's in Pepperdine's affirmation statement, and it says, truth fears nothing in investigation.
Yes.
And I just love that. You're not going to accidentally prove that God doesn't exist while doing your taxes.
Yes. Exactly.
There's nothing that you have to worry about. Just delve in, enjoy, right? I think a lot of times there's a posture of fear of being proven wrong or finding something that you don't wish you hadn't found. But if truth is truth, it's going to continue to be true. And there can be a fear of investigation that comes with some of the secular versions of progressive education, for example. There's a thought that there's almost this thought that like atheism is a neutrality somehow. Mm-hmm. Like that, like Christian schools, well, those are confessional in the same way that maybe a Jewish school or a Muslim school might be confessional. But a secular school that's non-confessional, is somehow atheism is deemed as the neutrality. But it's just a spiritual commitment to a non-spiritual reality. And so there's always going to be that religious aspect, I think, to anything, well, to really all of life. And what's special about classical Christian education is you just sort of acknowledge that and move forward with going deeper into all of it. Yeah. And I think that is far more academically free. We talk a lot about academic freedom in higher ed. It's a lot more intellectually sophisticated. It's also just a lot more human, a lot more inviting, a lot more hospitable, and that's good.
One of the things that you mentioned was just something that was bringing back a lot of memories for me, and I'll get to what it was in just a second. But I had this vivid memory of when my grandfather passed away. I didn't know him super well, and I was digging through all of his stuff one day after he had passed away, and I found a bunch of his old letters that he had written to his wife. And I combed through them and I started reading them. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know this man so well, and we're actually so similar. And even though his world events were so different than mine, there were so many questions he was struggling with that are the same ones that I'm struggling with. And I was just shocked at how human all of a sudden my grandfather became. And somehow I became so close with him just because I began to know him on a much deeper level than I could have ever as a kid. I remember having the exact same thing happen to me when I read Augustine's Confessions for the first time. And when he told the story about being a teenager and delighting in doing evil things just for evil's sake, I was like, how did you know me so well? That is exactly what, I mean, even down to what you were calling, I forget what we named his band of friends, whatever he named the boys. Everything was so familiar to me. You talked a little bit about getting to know C.S. Lewis a bit more and getting to study in his rooms. You had a kind of an encounter with the communion of the saints in the way. Could you talk a little bit more about that, of having this sort of ecumenism that doesn't just go horizontally with the people that we're in dialogue with currently, but also in the past?
It's phenomenal. It was a real privilege, really. I got to be at the Kilns in 2013, 2014. So the 50th anniversary of his passing, actually. And so there were a number of really cool events that were happening. And just got to meet a lot of really great people. Got to meet his stepson, for example, Douglas Gresham, and got to meet amazing C.S. Lewis scholars, people who had written about him, and then just people who were scholars and were intellectuals over at Oxford who just enjoyed his works, right? So that was really incredible, and it was fun getting to read Chronicles of Narnia for the first time, actually, in his house. I had read his more serious stuff before that, but just being like, I got to read the fun children's literature too. And getting to learn more about the house itself, his place in it, just as I was giving tours and such, because Oxford is a country place, it was not being bombed as much during World War II. And so his house was one of the places where children went to shelter from the fire bombings of London. Mm-hmm. So when the lady gives the tour to what's the Pevensies, gives them the tour and says, "Don't be disturbing the master." Well, C.S. Lewis is the master, and children had gotten that tour, right? And so he was there, and his house was providing shelter for children. And he actually wrote the Chronicles of Narnia as a way to help them get out of the present and sort of go into Narnia, go into this fantasy land that was very much apart from World War II, and to meet Aslan, to meet Christ there in Aslan in a different world. But one of the rooms that he wrote in was underneath the room that the children typically stayed in. It's called the children's room. And Mrs. Moore, one of the women who lived in the house, she everything was rationed. Obviously, it's World War II. So she made, and we want the children to be healthy too. So she would only give them a certain amount of cookies when it was time for cookies. And C.S. Lewis would have his, tea with cookie or whatever while he's writing in the room below. And they started this like pulley system where they would put a bucket in front of him in the window that he was writing in, and he would like throw a couple of extra, pastries or cookies, and they would pull it up. And it was sort of like a way to get just a little bit of extra sweets. So, just like little stories like that was really, really fun to learn and experience. And then getting to meet Walter Hooper, his personal secretary, who was a very good friend of his, and Aidan Mackey, who's a good friend of Walter Hooper, who happens to be one of the foremost authorities on Chesterton. And so Mr. Mackey was in his 90s and enjoyed a good glass of port. And so one of the ways I would get him to have conversations with me was I'd get like a good port when he was going to come by, and like we'd have a little glass and talk Chesterton. So nice. That was fun.
That's great. Well, we need to go back into kind of your personal story more too. So you're at Pepperdine. You're getting into you've done the Great Books program. Yeah. When you went to Pepperdine, well, I mean, why'd you go to Pepperdine in the first place? And was that a different reason than when you left Pepperdine?
Great question. Yeah. Great question. So I did what all good Arizona boys want to do, and that is go to Southern California for college. And the location was ideal, right there on the beach. Surfing was a PE credit, all the different things that you would expect, right? But the main reason why is I actually went to the school with a church camp. And so it's just seeing that this school was invested in actual spiritual formation. And it's the school that's connected with the denomination that I grew up in that took its academics seriously. One of their other statements is that the Christian faith demands the highest standards of academic excellence. And I loved that. Again, just sort of thirsting for, in the midst of like a public school education that said you can't bring your faith to bear on your education, and also a denomination where oftentimes you were discouraged from bringing your education to bear on your faith, getting to actually like go to a university that somehow grew out of that tradition and believes that they go together beautifully, was extremely attractive to me, and it did not disappoint. And the professors there were just equally committed to their faith and their intellect, and in a great way where it actually, you didn't have to be a Christian to go there. There was kind of a missional aspect to it. Right. So the professors were deeply committed to their faith, but any students could go. And so it was there if you want it, but you don't have to. And I found that really, really inviting. And so, then discovering that, I wanted to go deeper in that, went to Yale Divinity School and got to spend a lot of time with the Rivendell Institute at Yale. And the Rivendell Institute is this incredible evangelical research institute that's registered with Yale University that is all about human flourishing. It does a great job with interfaith dialogue and just really good spiritual formation, and trying to have really great Christian professors at Yale teach Christian graduate students how to then do the same and be great Christian professors and great researchers. And so it was really just seeing those things come together. I didn't even know classical Christian existed at this time.
Even at Yale?
No.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I didn't know about classical education. I didn't know about classical
Even though you were
Christian
just
education,
experiencing
but I was doing it. Yeah. Oh, so there was a very entrepreneurial approach to it in many ways. Pepperdine didn't have a program in the classics. We just kind of, my professors and I kind of cobbled that together, and it was fun. And then after that spent time at Oxford doing the Masters in Laontic and Byzantine Studies, because wanted to see how those things came together with the fall of the Roman Empire. And it was only after that I was like, I should double check that I really like teaching, because I'm clearly headed on that trajectory. I had taught a course with Pepperdine in London, but actual like middle school and high school teaching, right? And so I had heard of Great Hearts Academies just as an Arizonan who was graduating in 2007. Great Hearts had started a few years earlier, and thought, I'd love to see about getting a job there and working there for a few years, maybe going on doing a PhD after that. It was just awesome, sort of learning how to teach from people who knew how to teach well, which is not something that college or grad school often teaches you. And so that was the first time when I actually learned that there's this thing called classical education, that it exists on a K-12 level, and that because I had really been focusing on history, theology, and bringing those together, but just Great Hearts helped me sort of expand that to literature and philosophy and just the whole Western tradition as a whole, music, all of it, right? And so that was a delight. And then,
I have a question there. Maybe two. So when you went to Pepperdine, you'd said that in high school you were really interested in kind of science, math.
Yeah.
Had you thought you were going to go study that at Pepperdine? And then
I attempted. It was like a junior high dance. I really liked chemistry, and chemistry did not like me back. And so I ran to theology.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because I was wondering, you liked this thing, and then now you're Yale divinity.
I totally had it all planned out. Okay, so I want to discern calling, and I like math, I like science, and people really need medicine more than most things. So I'll work for Doctors Without Borders or something. And, especially in developing nations, there's a need for people who really know how to do dentistry well, and also optometry and ophthalmology. I don't really like teeth. So I'll be an ophthalmologist, and that'll be great. And just realized in first semester general chemistry that that's not who I am at all. I had discerned what I thought was the ideal calling. It just wasn't my calling.
There's something so ironic to me about the fact that the beginning of your story with classical education was being introduced as a seventh grader and asking, well, does it have to be boring in order for it to be classical? But now something has happened to you where you're literally about to take on this endeavor to go torture little kids with this awfulness and teach classical education to young people, expose them to classical literature. So at what point was there the shift of, oh no, this actually can be accessible somehow to people of all ages? When did you start to believe in that?
A great question. In stages. So first, Great Hearts helped me to see ways that could be done in an age-appropriate way, right? Because I felt really confident in my ability to do it with higher ed, with teaching as an adjunct professor with Pepperdine, but was a little less sure how to do it with middle school or high school, and certainly didn't have any clue how to do it with elementary. But realizing that there were people who were having those conversations deeply and well about who should read what when, was extremely encouraging and really great. And so that was sort of when I was like, yeah, I feel like even a kindergartner could begin to study classically. They're not going to read Plato. They might play with Plato. But, they could begin a curriculum that could prepare them to one day read Plato, right? and trying to not burn them out early in that, trying to take the long view of it. And just kind of coming to the conclusion eventually that it was, extremely delightful and fun to get to study these things. And then eventually discovering for the first time the existence of classical Christian education. Not long ago, really. I mean, like 7-ish years ago was when I first realized that I knew there was Christian schools. I knew there were classical schools, but I didn't know there were classical Christians. So that was a fun thing to get to experience, and to all of a sudden become an academic dean who's launching a high school where my job was literally to write the curriculum that would integrate these two worlds and in the summative, way with high school, with 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, just was an incredible experience. And trying to do that in a way that connects with a high school student's lived experience, right? So we were in the city of Atlanta, so we used, we called it our city as a classroom seminar. So we would actually go on a field trip every week. Every Friday, we'd go to a new spot in the city of Atlanta and really delve deeply into, again, the concept of integration. Because our goal is to bring the walls down. If people say that classical education is a bubble, they're incorrect on that. Elementary education can and should be a bubble. There is a protectiveness right there to young children. But in high school, the walls come down. And I think that as high school students experience their city, as they experience their literature, as they experience their heritage and sports, the arts, all of it, that ends up creating worldview, right? That ends up creating a situation where they realize what you've realized, which is this isn't closed off at all. And this isn't some sort of huddled up remnant of scared people. This is quite the opposite. I mean, that's I think the main thing that makes people have ownership, right, of their own faith and faith retention, and the fact that God has no grandchildren, right? So it's when people have an unmediated encounter with the classics for themselves, when they experience their city for themselves, when they experience a piece of art for themselves, a piece of music for themselves. And I just find that classical education facilitates that encounter more than other approaches tend to do.
Why did you get into school leadership? What was that call like?
Well, I think the more dramatic transformation was from higher ed to K-12 first. I had planned on...
Yeah, which you keep saying, like, I needed to know if I could teach, so I went to go to middle school and high school, which I don't know many grad students who ever think that. Well, I think they think, like, all right, I'll never have... it's beneath me. I'll never have to go back to that, you know?
I don't know. I just... The best professors of mine at Pepperdine were amazing teachers. And I had a great teachers in public school who were just phenomenal at actually connecting with students. And so I wanted to be someone who wasn't having my own wonderful experience at the front of my lecture hall talking about the literature when the students were bored to tears, right? And, I felt like actually teaching in middle school and high school would be the best way to learn how to do that well. And so, ended up doing that, then went for a PhD, and in the midst of the PhD program at Emory, learned that Christian classical education existed, and just fell in love with it, fell in love with that existing on a K-12 level, the way that soul formation could take place over time with that. And never applied for a single academic job, never applied to be a professor anywhere, because just was blown away by this K-12 incarnation. In many ways, it's almost as if it's being more faithfully done on the K-12 level because there's such a focus on integration. And it's like only a few amazing institutions that are doing that on a higher ed level. So that was one reason that I kind of began to go the K-12 route. And then the other reason was it's practical. On a K-12 level, a classical education is practical. When I have students come to me at Pepperdine after a Humanities 111 course that I teach and say, hey, I think I'm considering this for a major, I get excited with them. I tell them, hey, this is a great thing to do. I love it. But I also know in the back of my mind that they need to count the costs. And we do have that talk. And so I try to get them in touch with the right people to think of what a smart double major they could do and how they could go about this, because they do have to be career ready on some level as they're leaving college. I do believe that the humanities accomplishes that, but I know that the rest of the world doesn't think that way, right?
For now.
Yeah.
And so I recognize that there is an opportunity cost for a student taking Latin in college instead of computer science or something like that. At K-12, that tension does not exist. MIT loves seeing that there's this well-rounded education, that students are studying different languages, that they're studying all these different curricula. So there's a practicality actually to doing classical education on a K-12 level that was just so deeply wonderful. And just realizing that there was a network of schools and a school of thought within education that actually believed in, the humanities mattering and the classics actually being something that matters. So that ended up being really attractive. The call to leadership was less dramatic, but more unexpected. And because I had really figured teaching was the way to go. But I had such a great time launching the high school for Heritage Preparatory School of Georgia and serving as their academic dean and helping to lead the high school team and the department chairs. And just, I was lucky because I was working with two heads of schools, a headmaster and a president, who either had like 20 years of leadership experience as a head of school, or was used to, had been a former chief of staff for two governors and was used to running the state of Georgia. So people who actually like truly knew leadership and knew how to do it well, which I did not know at all. And just realizing, wow, this is actually really fun. And this is actually really, frankly, the application of the classical tradition in so many ways of rhetoric and leadership and institution building and vision casting. I mean, there's a reason that for much of world history, Western European nations had their future leaders study the classics. It actually prepares you for leadership in a brilliant way.
Right.
You get to know people. And so, and then I just was also blessed by getting to see teacher support within education done exceptionally well. Seeing that done well at Heritage helped me to see, administration can actually be awesome. It can be something that makes this whole project go from possible to really within reach, right? And in higher ed, I had seen it not done as well, right? Where you sort of knew who the teachers were by the hunted look in their eyes when administrators were around. And so the opportunity to get to do leadership in K-12 education, in classical education, and to do it in a way that is hopefully helpful and good, and diverts our money and our development to the right things and the right projects, and focuses our philanthropy on the right initiatives. I just feel like when that happens, the sky's the limit. And just as a historian, all the great movements institutionalize, right? And all the great philosophies systematize in some way or form or fashion. And so, first of all, it's inevitable. And so I'd like to actually be one of the people who can be a part of that conversation.
The Christians had to become the man at some point.
Exactly. And so I figure, you know what, and there are things that I miss. Like I very much miss getting to do seminars with high school students. Don't get to do that near as frequently as I used to. But I get to have other types of seminars with other types of people on other types of concepts. And I get to do so as one who has that Christian classical background and hopefully brings that to bear on leadership. So then there's that extra dimension of integration.
Yeah. We've only got about 15 minutes left, so I don't know how we're going to cover all this ground in that time.
I'm Italian.
Do we even have that? Where are we on time?
I mean, I say 15 minutes because I want 15 minutes more.
I think we've got 5.
Yeah.
We've got 5. So no, this is good. And this has been wonderful. And as we say with all of our guests, we're going to need to do a part 2.
That's right. Maybe that's all season 2 is. All our part 2s.
Right. Yeah. We've foregone the 3 to 4 hour long form podcast, but we understand why people do that, because it's just at the hour mark that you really start, digging into the next layer. But so I'd love to just kind of ask the last question as the last part of what we do in the podcast, which is how has this transformation now allowed you to pour into others in the work that you're doing?
That's a great question. I think it's just clarified calling, and it's helped to create a community of I almost said like contemporary saints, sort of a riff on Hebrews 12, I guess. But really though, I mean, that's what's so nice about Hebrews 11 is that you realize that you're a part of a group that has existed throughout time, right? And you don't have to suffer from that Elijah syndrome where you feel like you're the only one at all. I'm blessed that that's been pretty obvious to me by the presence of a lot of great mentors for most of my life. But there's just something special about classical education. And I think that the thing that's most special is that you just get to meet lots of wonderful people who are engaged in this shared work from a multiplicity of very different perspectives for a whole bunch of different reasons. And yet there's this shared work that we get to engage in with one another that's really energizing and fun and inviting. And I think part of that is that we're sort of on the vanguard of a new thing that's happening in the United States. And so it's not been overly systematized, not been overly developed, overly defined. And I'm sure there will be a season in our history where we need to sort of dial that back a little bit and figure out how to reclaim that heart of things. But there just seems to be a thrilling combination of intellectual depth, of spiritual commitment, of like human joy, of creativity, and of like good hard-nosed business and leadership and finance that's like just coming together in this movement of classical schools, rather they be independent or part of different networks. And that is such a exciting thing to be a part of. And the fact that the sort of raison d'etre and the whole existence of that movement is actually predicated on the development of young minds and souls is so refreshing. Like it would be cool enough if this business were focused on, some like means of production or, like a service or something within some sort of sector of the economy. But the fact that it's actually like focused on children and young adults and helping them to discern who they are in the world, in conversations with some of the greatest minds that have ever existed, it's just a really exciting thing to be a part of.
That's great. Well, thank you, Anthony, for being on the Furrows. Ryan, will you close us out?
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. It's I think this is how it always goes, where it's just a little bit of sadness at the end that, okay, we got to wrap this up. We'll have to get part 2 figured out, ironed out. But I'm really appreciative. I do feel like when we get into the depths of the conversations, I still feel the spirit of Lewis stepping into the room with us, Augustine stepping into the room with us, the early church. So thank you taking us back there. And thank you for another awesome episode of the Furrows podcast.